you just can really learn and understand and incorporate into your life what he says in that book, you're essentially home free.
Yeah, you are. We're talking about Vernon Howard. We're introducing you to Vernon Howard. And this one of his books is called Pathways to Perfect Living. And I want to read the quote that he put in the book from Walt Whitman. And it says, "It is not far, it is within reach. Perhaps you have been on it since you were born and did not know." You think that's that eternal longing that we have? We know there's something else, but we really can't define it.
I think so. I also think it's knocking on the door trying to talk with us, but we're so busy and our minds are running 100 miles an hour, we never hear it.
I think it's like, it's truth, it's raining down everywhere, but our ego, and I don't just mean our pompous ego, our vanity about everything in life is just an obstacle in the way. You can't see the light. You can't see the forest for the trees, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, it's like trying to talk to somebody that's already made up their mind and they discount everything you say. I've mentioned before, there's some people so invested in their positions in religions that if a true God came to the earth, they would say he was the devil and needs to be scorned and got rid of because that would jeopardize their position. They can't see what's right in front of them. They can't see the truth.
They've created these narratives, and we all do, in our minds of what we believe it. Let's say, since we all have pretty much heard of Jesus, people believe there's going to be a second coming. What if Jesus comes back and he does not look like the paintings as he's been portrayed, and he's standing on the street corner, "I'm Jesus and I'm back, I don't want to..." Who would believe him?
They probably have him on psychotropic drugs in the loony bin before long.
And he may be there right now.
There's a sobering thought to think about.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because back then, people didn't have long hair. They had short hair. They had shaved heads because of light. This is an artist's portrayal of this glowing being. Well, Jesus was a man.
Yeah, nobody knows what he actually looked like. There's no images.
No.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting concept. And Vernon Howard comes from a Christian background, as far as I can tell, but he is very hard on when a religion or an organization or a person becomes crystallized in their thinking, or you want to call it severely closed-minded. Nothing else will enter. Then if you can't move from one position or another, you're assuming everything you think or know is right and everybody else is wrong.
Right, and you end up persecuting other people, doing the very things that you're not supposed to do. And that's why I always had trouble with this notion that, all you had to say was, when you died, I changed my mind, I accept God, and then everything's fine, you're going to go to heaven.
Yeah.
I think that's a little bit of wishful thinking. I think such a thing happens, you'll be seen for what you truly are. Doesn't matter what religion you are, doesn't matter anything, it just matters who you are.
I look at it this way. When you finally arrive at the checkout counter, there's a bill to pay.
Yeah, likely so.
Yeah, I don't care what you believe, what you profess you are, what you think, and mostly it's thoughts that have been placed in your head, very little to do with reality. Yeah. There's still a price to pay. It's not a free ride. And I believe, in looking at today's, it's easy to see when you read through this Pathways to Perfect Living by Vernon Howard, and I'll name a few chapters in a minute, that in this crazy world, it was still crazy when he wrote about it. He called the whole world being mentally ill, and we're all on the same train. Right. To break free from that is a very difficult thing to do.
Well, especially if everybody's ill, then nobody's ill in people's minds. They're normal. Yeah. They're just like everybody else.
Everybody's in the same mental institution. I've always liked the thought, and I can't remember where I read it or heard it over the past 73 years or whatever, that the reason nothing changes in society to any great degree, say you got a big bowl on the table and it's full of fruit. Say it's got a bunch of oranges. Everybody keeps picking the same oranges. It's the same level of awareness. I've always liked the phrase, the answer to the question is at a higher level than the question. Well, you can see in politics today, there's not many higher levels of questioning going on.
Well, some people have put out the notion that really for the last 5,000 years, most everything stayed kind of the same in men's society. And now we've come into a period of rapid change, and we still have a Stone Age brain for the most part, and Stone Age awareness. We still have the basic impulse controlled by the impulses of what they call them the 4 F's, which is feeding, flight, fighting, and we all know what you all do for adult entertainment. Those are the 4 F's.
Well, yeah, and fear.
Right. I'm sorry. Fear was one of them. I think I said one twice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are the 4, and essentially they still control these Stone Age emotions of survival. Still control everybody's life, for the most part.
Well, man is an animal, and I mention this quite a bit in conversations with people. So what do animals do? When animals, even in their own domain, when there becomes an out of balance situation, the herd is culled naturally. If there's too many, a disease will come in and kill off the weak ones. Now, some people may say that's what's happening now with COVID. I don't personally believe that, but when you do we're a breeding population. We are animals. When that breeding population gets out of control and out of balance, and it can be you have more people who are more violent are now being developed and brought into this world by people who are more violent. So when that violence starts overtaking the peace, which is Jordan Peterson's book, the 12 Rules for Life, chaos.
Yeah.
Is that where we're headed?
Well, overpopulation is the same thing as crowding. More competition for resources, less opportunities in the workplace, and it does bring aggression and anger and violence.
It does.
Yeah.
So what?
You don't have road rage when there's 4 cars on the street, but you do when there's 400.
Yeah.
You know?
Because you're placed in these situations. So let's get back to the individual. Why do the individuals act that way? And why do they continue to act that way even when they see it's harmful to themselves? I'm going to read a few things as we go along. One, he said, we must deeply see the need for self-transformation. Simply defined, self-change means to no longer think, feel, act, desire, respond, and live in your usual ways. In what ways do you live your day? That must be changed. Self-transformation has nothing to do with the behavior of others toward you. It means you react with calm self-command to their behavior, whatever it may be. The need for change must be felt deeply and powerfully. A man must be utterly weary with the stage performance which has been crushing compulsion up to now. He must be possessed by a strong and persistent urge to understand what is presently a painful puzzle to him. I want to emphasize that his distress must be almost unbearable for true change.
You know, he actually sort of said that in a little catchy phrase where he says you must become sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a much nicer presentation of it, but it's the same idea.
Well, he said everyone is distressed, but most try to escape it with petty exterior changes. Losing weight, feel better about, all those are good things, but they're not going to change who you are basically. And it's not really who you change who you are, you remove the obstacles to find your true self.
Right.
It's within you. You don't have to go anywhere. People say, oh, I'm going to India and I'm going in a cave and meditate and catch enlightenment. No, you'll probably catch a cold.
If you're lucky.
If you're lucky.
Yeah. We talked about that, one other time, this idea that people feel uneasy, they feel anxiety, they feel fear about what's going to happen, and their impulse is to try to fix the world, right? And the history of trying to fix the world, I would say, is very dismal. It has not worked. You have to fix yourself. I knew we were truly in trouble as a country when safe spaces became a big issue. That in order to feel confident and secure, you had to block out anything that might diminish, attack, bother your ego. And it's almost like the safe spaces is almost like an ultimate form of egotism, if you think about it.
Well, sure it is. I think a person who, you talk about ego, and we're not just talking about the compulsive show-off. We're talking about the false self you believe in.
Right.
And there's a big difference, because the word has been really overused so much. Maybe we can say your false identity and your true identity. That's really what he says.
I did find a sort of definition in the book from Vernon Howard, and he said this: people don't see they have only borrowed ideas, values, ambitions, and attitudes. They have lost natural knowing. They are not authentic.
I like authentic.
Yeah.
You're not the ship that's flying the pirate flag.
Right. I mean, you remember when you're born, what do you know about yourself? Nothing. You feel your hunger, you feel comfort, discomfort, things like that, but you have no concept of who you are. So you're born without an ego. And it's only over time, through the experience you have, people telling you who you are, you making conclusions about who you are, that you develop this ego. It's really a mishmash of stuff. It's not a coordinated whole. It's all over the place. And that's one of the reasons why so many people are a mess. In modern psychology, what does it try to do? It puts Band-Aids on that. It tries to fix it. It doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work.
No.
And I've often drawn the parallel with you're born, your parents teach you certain things. That's a programming. Some of them are essential. How to take care of yourself, good hygiene, how to, learn a job, make money, provide for yourself. But everybody in society programs you, and you go through that for 18 years. You get a diploma from high school, and they hand it to you and say, "Be yourself." Well, you have no idea what that means.
I remember years and years ago reading that famous thing in a book that says, over a Greek temple, know thyself. And when I read it in those days, I thought, hey, no problem, I know myself. Well, since then, it's probably been about 40 to 50 years, and I realized I didn't have a clue back then. And unfortunately, there's nothing in society to help you. You have to pretty much find this on your own, which is maybe a good thing. Because everybody rebels against not everybody, but a lot of people rebel against what you're supposed to do and all this. But still, there's hardly a clue. Thank goodness we have the availability of books with teachings all over the world and throughout time that we've had in this country. And even still, most people have never read any of it. Or if they have, they read one and said, that's not for me, and put it aside.
Well, it's one thing to read something, it's another thing to put it into practice. I know people who are so intellectually burdened, they can talk to you about enlightenment. They know nothing about enlightenment. They know the words. It's like a pilot who read a book how to fly a plane. You're going to go with him? Hey, I've read a book. Let's go for a No. He's lived it. He's explored himself. If you really want to dig into who you really are and seek what you are, it's an everyday experience. Mm-hmm. It's not reading a book. It's observing. It's not being involved in certain situations. It's an inner awareness, and it takes a lot of practice to develop that self-control. I've often said to people, don't argue with a tornado. That's what conversations are. You just go on and on and on. There's even a quote, and I'll find that and we'll come back to it.
Okay.
But it's that inner awareness that you listen to. Normally when something's presented to you, you know immediately if it's good for you, but your mind will talk you out of, oh, I can make that work.
Sure. To me, there's two things, the way I look at it. Is first, you have to create a gap between your awareness and thoughts and feelings. Right? They say that one of the things that kids are taught today is honor your feelings, always go with your feelings. Pretty bad advice if you ask me.
Yeah, because then you go with what's pleasurable and what feels good. And in the long run, most time is not good for you.
Yeah, and in psychology, they would say that's an immature level of development. And now they're advocating that as a goal to pursue.
Well, you look at problems in society, and here's something I wrote, or I made a note of, said to master this. And Vernon Howard talks about this. He said, your first and only attention must be your anxious state, not to the outcome of what you're pursuing. Though you may not see it as yet, the problem is your anxiety, not the outcome. Attention to outcome perpetuates slavery to anxiety, even when the eventual result matches your original desire. Awareness of anxiety dissolves it, for anxiety is a bluff which you must see through. So if you're presented with a situation, or you're going into a meeting, or there's a family situation, what happens with most people, and I will say with mothers and children, because that's go immediately, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? And they focus on that. They focus on the outcome. And what does that outcome they perceive? Tremendous anxiety it causes in their life. I used to say to my late wife, I said, well, how much worry is going to make it better? She I said, well, think about it, Sandy. You're worrying yourself sick about this, and we're not even close to the event. But that's what your mind does when you follow your mind.
And also, when your attention is captured by emotions and thoughts, you can't see what's out there. All you're doing is projecting all these labels out into the environment, and you think you know what's going on. You've never really checked to see what actually is going on.
And the last part of this paragraph is, have you noticed that whenever you are desireless toward an event, that it has no power to affect you? Watch it. Where there is neither hope nor fear, the result leaves you alone with peace. Do you remember how you once suffered over losing that person who was once in your life? Now that it is over, now that your desire is gone, where is the pain? That's a good example of anything that happens in your life. And it can be a very torturous situation at the time, losing a loved one, a breakup, losing your job. But if you focus on that outcome, the anxiety can continue for years. I know people who had one event in their life capture them, and they're reliving that every day of their life. They hold a grudge, they're mad at someone, woe is me. They're locked into it.
Yeah, unfortunately, when you form most of your ego, you're in your childhood years. And you do not do a good job handling things. And it's the old story of when a kid loses the ice cream from top of his ice cream cone, that's a tragedy to him just as much as a king losing his empire. And I remember a story I read about a woman that she couldn't have good relationships with men. They never would work. She had no feeling. She didn't enjoy that part of marriage. And it turned out that all that happened was one day her father, who used to come home and give her a little hug every day, had been fired from his job. His competitor had taken his position in the company. And he just, when she went to run to him, he just brushed her aside. And that trauma, which is she judged as being total rejection from her father, controlled her life for the next 40 years.
And it wasn't total rejection, it was one instance.
Yeah.
And yeah, it may have hurt her feelings as a child, but she latched on to it.
Yeah. Our egos are basically defective because they're made with faulty judgments, inability to make proper assessments in the world. It's almost like that movie Benjamin Buttons. Did you ever see that?
Oh yeah.
We need to start when we're older and wiser.
If we could.
If we could, and you do a much better job. Because like you said, we do need to have an ego to deal with the world. But the ego should not be in control. Because, in other words, the ego has good functions, but it has a lot of baggage, a ton of baggage, that unfortunately is the nature of us growing up. I remember seeing some of these science fiction movies where you would clone a person and he'd start off at 25 years old. I mean, no wonder he was mature and could do what he needed, because he didn't have to go through all the struggles and woes and tragedies of childhood.
I've said to my kids, every one of them, you don't know, I'll say squat, but I said something else. You don't know squat until you're 40.
Yeah.
You have finally grown up a little from being a teenager to a young adult to hopefully accepting responsibility and have some experience in the world. Now look around and tell me what you think of the world at 40 versus what you thought of the world when you were 20. Well, imagine what you're going to think of the world when you're 60.
Yeah.
So, but no, we instant gratification, give it all to us now, and this society is so narcissistic and pleasure-seeking that I think we're in for a rude awakening.
Yeah. Well, we talked about safe spaces. The other much worse thing that's out there right now is one of the ways a lot of people whose egos are insecure, they love to join groups. They start using group identities. They feel strong, powerful because of the group they belong to. And they look at everybody else as something other. Now the problem is, and this really was brought home to me by reading a little bit about fascism and Marxism, that people who join in groups and think they're right, and you talked a little bit about religions have this problem as well from time to time, is there's been many horrible things done to groups by another group that's more powerful. And the reason why is they don't see them as people. They don't see them as individuals. They're just this group.
Absolutely.
And just mass killings have been done for that reason. Genocide's been done for that reason. Wars have been done for that reason. I mean, if you ever look at war propaganda, I've seen the posters from World War I and World War II, in America, mind you. And they try to throw everybody in that country, the enemy, into the same mold, the Hun. Remember the Hun?
Yes.
Right? And all Germans were Nazis, which wasn't true at all. Many of them were just afraid of the Nazis and afraid to not do what they say, but they didn't believe in Nazis. All right? Fascism, the same kind of problem. That usually ends up in civil wars. Or like Mussolini, you end up upside down hanging from a lamppost. All right? But this is based from this danger of identifying people only by certain characteristics. It's like they were talking about, the critical race theory, which has been around for a while, but it's gotten really popular. It's really a form of racism. It's taking a group, which is basically white people, and they're giving them all the same characteristics. They're all guilty of all the same crimes. That's as bad as religious fundamentalism. That's as bad as communism. That's as bad as fascism and Marxism.
But these same people, when you say, well, look at what you're doing, well, you're painting us with a broad brush. We're not all that way. We're not whatever we are in society. We deserve more than that. You're the problem, not us. Turn the spotlight on you. You don't have money. You don't do. Did you get an education?
Right.
Have you saved 10% of your income? Have you done? No, but it's not my fault. Personal responsibility seems to be out the window.
They would say, Jim, you're in denial.
Yeah.
You don't
know how hard I've had it.
You don't recognize that you've created all these problems that you say I have.
Well, we can't fix society. We know that.
Right.
My advice to people, and Vernon Howard's in the own way, leave society alone. Work on yourself. Work on your own self-awareness. When you start becoming self-realized, you will see that you cannot change it.
Right. The reason we're talking about it, though, is because to help them see that it's a trap, it's a dead end to go this way, and that there is another solution that's not been shown them. You know, out there's all these groups, and they're on mainstream media, and they get all the publicity and all that, where you and I are sitting on a dining room table talking about these things. And yet, this is the way that actually works.
It does, and it's self-inquiry. It's looking into yourself. It's finding what your true self is, or who your true self is, not leading a life of anxiety and turmoil and fear. And I know people today are finding it harder and harder when they see what's going on in the cities. Well, I should, load up my guns and do it. Well, if you want to do that as an insurance policy, that's fine. But if it ever comes to that, is this a place you want to live? You got to ask yourself. Just watch the movie Escape from New York and see if that's what you want. But the problem we have in trying to deal with society, their level of awareness hasn't changed. I don't care. You can march, you can protest, you can do whatever. And we grew up in the 60s, I never went to a peace protest. You know why? Because peaceful people were there. The people who needed to be there weren't there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's the way society works.
So
the first step,
Yes.
A notation in Vernon Howard's book, which is Pathways to Perfect Living on page 44, he says the first step, and this was a question that was asked him in one of his talks. He said, go through the next few hours with an absence of your usual sense of self. Do not believe that you are doing anything. See everything as simply happening to you all by itself. Feel yourself guided by something other than your own thoughts and decisions. Do not try to identify who or what is guiding you. Quietly follow. After a while, a sense of something totally different will enter. And I think that's when the universe wants to give you the answers. What you want wants you, but it's not from the external world. It's from the internal.
Yeah, when you say the true self, as you mentioned before, that's not an idea that you try to make up. It's something that's already there that you need to meet and greet.
If you want to call your soul, or you want to call it your part of the God particle, or whatever you want to call it, the best thing is not call it anything, or just think of it as true and let it start happening. And follow the lead, and you will be, when you're ready, the master will appear. I cannot tell you how many times in my life I've thought of a situation, but rather than trying to build a framework what it should be, or a thought form, I said, well, I can tell I need to move out of this job. I don't know where, but I'll just put it out there. And boom, the phone will ring. I'll meet someone. It's just amazing when you don't get in the way of yourself, which is hard not to do.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we play golf. Because you can actually apply these principles to playing golf.
I think golf is a great life lesson.
Yeah.
It's trying to teach me patience, but I still have problem when the players in front of us are really slow.
Yeah. I remember when there was some popularity with the notion of take business people out to play golf, because then you'll see their true self. And they never flipped it the other way, is that you might see your true self when you play golf.
Yeah.
Because you can't hide on a golf course.
No.
You can't blame your teammates. It's just you.
Well, and we play golf, and we play golf with certain people, and we do see true personalities after a while. And you look at Bobby Sutton, great golfer, very calm person, and you can mention other people who aren't. But that's why I enjoy the game. I'm not tremendously good at the game. I'm okay. I can do all right. But I enjoy our conversation and us out there. And we encourage each other. I'm not out there to beat you. I'm way past that. I don't even know. But yeah, it's you against the golf course. How do you plan this shot, the next shot? What club do you use? Very much like life.
Right.
Most people go through life with a driver. And that's all they try to do. They drive home their ideas, they drive home their power and their control over people. They don't know what a butter is.
That's right. I'd like to say one quote I found out from Vernon on your ego. He says, your ego doesn't know what's best for you. It's an interesting thought.
No.
Yeah, he says, because it doesn't want to change, it just wants to justify and defend itself.
Over and over. The ego's the last thing to go, and it goes kicking and screaming.
Right. Yeah. One of the things that I learned to watch for is repetitive thoughts. Okay.
Okay.
And it's funny if
which ones?
the 600 that rattle around my head on a daily basis. And I've told you before, that's that same notion. Have you lived one day or one day 10,000 times? If you have all the same thoughts constantly rotating in your mind, how can you not have one day 10,000 times? Just can't be done. There's this interesting thing when you first start working with these ideas, and it's like you don't realize that you're talking to yourself when you're unaware of it, and then you start catching yourself with thoughts that you were like, it's kind of like you hear half the thought, like in a dream when you always start in the middle. You get into the back half of the sentence, and you didn't realize, man, I was thinking this, and you didn't even realize you were thinking it. And then, but emotions can do the same thing. They can totally grab your attention. You don't even know what you're doing. You're just completely consumed by the emotion. So what happens is, just like we don't get rid of the ego, we get it to its proper use, which is dealing with everyday affairs. We don't get rid of this isn't some kind of extreme stoicism where we get rid of all thoughts, a blank mind, and no emotions. Right? We just put everything in its proper place, and it's you have a mind, you have thoughts, you have emotions, right? They're not running the show. They're not controlling things. And until you can get to that point, you're at their mercy. And in his words, he would say you're their slave.
Well, you are.
You are a slave.
You are a slave
right?
to your emotions, your thoughts, because those thoughts are telling you, you must have this, you must be this, you must have your possessions, your positions, your power. That's your identity. That's what makes you you. Well, and there's an old saying, I don't see any U-Hauls tied to or hooked up to the back of a hearse. You don't take it with you.
Right.
And you don't take what you think you are with you either, because it's your false self.
Yeah, one of the best comments I think he ever made on the ego was, we work at jobs we hate. We buy things we don't want so we can impress people we don't like. That's the ego for you, folks.
Yes, it is, and we do that.
Yeah.
What are your real needs? Success to me is living below your means, having savings. Savings to me, money is a tool that buys your freedom. Then you're not attached, you're not, let's face it, if you've got $20,000 in a savings account and you lose your job, you're in pretty good shape. You got 2,000, you're not in really very good shape. You're at the whim, you'll take the first job, but 2 days later, you may have been offered a job that you really enjoyed, but you panic.
One of the concepts that he has in multiple times in the different books is this idea that as you go along on the path, what was once important to you becomes insignificant, and what was insignificant becomes important.
Very much so. Later in life it happens to some people. I won't say all or most. I don't know. I don't know numbers.
Well, you know how a kid can be totally entertained by watching an ant. You get a little bit like that when you get older and wiser.
Yeah.
You enjoy the little things. You don't have to get a brand new car to feel good about yourself. You can just walk outside and feel the sun on your face and just marvel at the beauty of it.
You've got to slow down. I think that
comes natural.
Yeah, you really have to slow down and look around and take your time. What is it? Psalm 46:10, be still and know that I am God. Meaning you're part of God. you slow down and you see that. What do you really need in your life to be happy? The problem is we seek happiness. If we seek purpose, then we become content. Don't seek happiness. Contentment is different from happiness. Happiness fluctuates. Contentment comes from within.
Yeah.
It's a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah, there's any happiness from outer things is fleeting. I mean, we all know people, they have the biggest home, they've got to go to the best country clubs, they eat their best restaurants, they have their own airplanes, and they're miserable.
Miserable.
Right? And it's not because there's anything wrong with a big house, but it's his expectation, perhaps, that now everybody's going to think he's the most wonderful guy in the world, and everything will go right in his life. You read anybody's life story, and many times you wouldn't want to have to go through all of what they went through, and they're phenomenally successful people in life.
And a caveat of what we're talking about, and it's Vernon Howard's book, Pathways to Perfect Living. And Vernon Howard, we're introducing you to Vernon Howard. You may not have heard about him, but he's written, I think, 22 books. Is that when you get and start developing these principles within yourself and you think, oh, wow, I can't wait to tell so-and-so about it. Don't have any expectations that people are going to share what you believe in, because you will become more and more alien to them when you don't react to the same situation they do. I've had more, especially those close to you, family members, you say, that doesn't upset you? You're not mad about that, what that person said to you? When did they say, well, you know, in that conversation you had, I said, that was yesterday. I don't carry that with me. And they just couldn't, why weren't you offended, or why aren't you anxious about this? Because I've developed those habits that he talked about. Now, I've been studying this, good Lord, Bob, how long have we, since I was 16 years old, basically.
Yeah, I mean, there is no final destination.
No.
This is a lifelong journey. There's no doubt about that. So, and it's kind of like, it's not like, and likewise, it's not that you have to do for years and then you get a reward. There's little rewards and revelations,
small
and
increments.
Insights. Yeah, you progress in small increments, but you also enjoy it. I mean, you get benefits from it almost from the beginning. Heck, you can just start doing simple meditation and just count your breaths to 10 and from 1 to 10 a bunch, and even that alone do physiological changes in your body and change how you look at the world. It couldn't be simpler. There's no magic techniques. It's a matter of doing. Persistence, right?
What you want wants you. Take the first step, and the next step will be revealed. I talked about this a little bit earlier, and someone asked him about conversation, and here's what he said. When someone asks you a question about anything at all, try to answer as briefly and directly as possible. Don't say a single unnecessary word. This will produce a minor shock. You will feel a compulsive urge to say more. Don't. Do you see what this does? It reveals how much of human conversation is wasteful compulsion. Now you have a fresh self-awareness which saves energy for inner advancement. And this is what happens to so many people all day long, is useless conversation. When they get home or have time, they're worn out. They don't have time for inner advancement or to read. They are mentally worn out. Yeah. We call them, you know, and I have people I deal with who come to the home who offer different services, do my yard, whatever, that can incessantly talk to you. We call them, you know, chatty people.
Chatty Cathy, right?
You know, chatty Cathy, or you know, and some males are the same way. They will wear you out. And what that does, they're people who will just suck your inner energy, and you need to be casual, be polite, and get the heck away from them.
Yeah, I don't know if it's Shakespeare, but there's this thing about suffering fools.
Yeah.
And Vernon Howard is very clear about that. He suggests you stay away from toxic people who are just trying to pull you into their mess,
Yeah.
into their world. They want you to take on their problems. And he clearly says, it's their problem, not yours. You have no obligation to fix their problem.
There's a saying that a smart person learns from their mistake. A wise person learns from other people's mistakes. Be more of an observer. And when you stand back and watch a situation, maybe an argument, maybe someone buying something they don't need, I can hear thousands of situations, and you don't participate, and then it goes by, you'll feel a sense of relief and also a sense of renewed energy. You didn't waste your precious energy on involving yourself in each one of those situations.
Yeah, I had some dealings with the police about a year and a half ago, where they were going to arrest somebody. It was outside of a public beach, maybe 10 or 11 at night, and they were trying to accuse the person of being in possession of drugs. Never told them that I was an attorney. I didn't try to pull that card. They don't like attorneys anyway. And I did just what you said. They would make an accusation, and I'd say something very simple back, and I would just wait.
Yeah.
I didn't say anything, and they got flustered and left.
Yeah, when they don't have the answers, and I've been a private investigator for 40 years, and going and taking statements from not only police, but people involved in accidents or people who have been harmed, is when you sit down with them, it's amazing. You've got 3 witnesses, and they will all have different stories, but they saw the same event. So that tells you it's not infallible when people say, oh, I saw him do that, or I saw her do that, or they did this, or they did that. To really always say there are 3 sides to every story. There's his side, her side, and the truth. And that's usually what it is. But they truly believe that's what happened.
Yeah.
But like you say, our programming a lot of times determines on what we think we saw.
Right. And getting back to the ego, that's how the ego is formed. It's what we think happened, what we think somebody meant when we were very young and not able to really do it.
Well, think how harmful it is today. More people have broken off relationships because of text messages. They read into a text message that this person is critical of me, or they hate me, or they're saying, and that's not what the text message meant at all. But they took it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I've made jokes in text messages that didn't get received at all as a joke. Then didn't get mad or anything, they just missed it completely. Whereas if I'd been there in person, it probably would have worked.
Yeah, they can see your facial expressions. Yeah. They know it's the intent. But they assume that your intent is in a certain direction. That's their problem, but then they make it, then they call other people and tell what a creep you are, Bob. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. But this goes back to what you were saying before. We can't rely that our perception tells us the absolute truth. Right? I don't care how much someone's an authority or claims that they're an authority. I would take nothing they say as the absolute truth.
No, find out for yourself.
Yeah.
Personal experience.
You can go along with it, but you always have a reservation.
Yep.
You always make sure there's a back door behind you.
Vernon Howard, talking about a number of things, he did say this. He said, truth is more valuable than anything else on earth. This means that everything else is of less value. So in order to get the truth, you must give up something which you now assume is more valuable. This giving up is your payment. How does this work in practice? True happiness can be gained by paying for it with your own vanity, for vanity borrows happiness. To be free of torturous envy, we must pay by letting go of those unnatural thoughts which cause envy. For peaceful understanding, our payment is to sacrifice our insistence that we already know ourselves. You can't say it much better than that, can you?
No, you can't.
But when people see now, I can read that, and there are probably hundreds of people listening to this right now, and all of them will have a different idea of what that means. Mm-hmm. But you must put it into practice to get an understanding. Don't think your intellect, don't think you can read a book and put it on the shelf and never read it again. This is probably the 5th time I've read this book.
Right, and you know, there's a very common tendency to say, oh, I already knew that.
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
And
do you do
who's
it?
telling you
Is
that?
it part of your life?
Your brain's telling you that, you know?
Yeah. You know, talk about a little bit what actually happens when you free yourself from your ego. Where are you, so to speak? You know, what happens to you? What are some of the things that occur when you finally let go? And of course, you know, also talking about personas as well, which is how we present ourselves to the world, what we want people to think we are, okay? The ego is kind of like what we think we are, what people have taught us what we are, what conclusions we've made about ourselves. So once we put that aside, what happens?
Well, are you asking me? Okay.
Yeah.
I think if I had, I don't know that I can totally define it. I can make it pretty simple. What you can do for yourself is free, and it's freeing. It frees you from turmoil. It frees you from anxiety. Does it pop up every once in a while? It does, and it will. You're a human being. But that inner seeking of your true self, that self-inquiry, and when you start going along that path and you practice that where you don't get involved in situations, you don't get upset. I've often said to my kids, there's no good or bad, it's only your reaction to it. And that's a way I would sum it up. How are you going to react to these situations? Yeah. But it's just, to me, Bob, it's just a sense of freedom. No one controls me. I have no one to blame. And it really is total personal responsibility. If I haven't saved enough money and haven't invested and nobody taught me these things, your education begins when you leave formal education, when you leave college and you leave school. If you think you got it there, you're crazy. You better find out. Don't turn your life over to other people. Be the steward of your own life.
Right. And if someone listening has never experienced the sense of freedom, when a weight's been taken off your shoulders, and I told you that I once had the experience of actually feeling weight go off my shoulders, and it puts a spring in your step. All is well with the world. It's a wonderful thing. One of the things that I thought about a little bit more about what happens. Now, we're not talking esoteric or magical or anything like that. That what happens is when you make an ego, you limit yourself to being a kind of person. When that falls away, all the natural potentials you have in you start to manifest themselves. So it's kind of like most people with an ego is like a carpenter with a hammer. You see everything as a nail. The only tool you have to do everything is a nail. But once you free yourself from your ego, all these things just sort of start coming to you where you can do things. Now, you're still human, right? But you can use your human potential. You can be more whatever any situation calls for. If it's to be gentle, you can be gentle. If you need to be harsh, you can be harsh. You can be brave, you can back off. You have all these potentials. And I think they start to manifest themselves with this freedom that you get. I think we have a lot of potentials that we never do. It's like I've been releasing the inner golfer for 30 years, trying to get the golfer free. And I've had dreams and things like that to help me do that. And to some degree, it's worked. You're my testament for that.
No,
you know?
it really does. Well,
yeah.
You know, you talk about those things and those situations you get into. There will be times when you're challenged in your life. Could be physical, could be other ways. But if you have the artillery of good communication and skills, just the way you disarm that policeman in that situation, and then they realize, and I can give you plenty of examples. I won't, it's not to boost my ego, but when people have come up to me and they tried to manipulate me or say things to manipulate me, and I would take a stance, They just get a blank look on their face and go, oh, time to go on down the food chain because this guy's not buying it. I can't intimidate him. I can't, because you don't have anything I want. And when you say that to someone, it's, what? People believe. If you ask someone, tell me about yourself, they'll tell you about their job, they'll tell you about this, they tell you, no, that's what you do. Who are you? And that's where the big confusion is. We believe, okay, he plays professional football, or he does that, or owns a business. That's not who he is. That's what he does. Yeah. You said it the other day. You practice law. You're not a lawyer.
Right.
That's not who you are.
Right. Thank God. Right. One of the things that you see very commonly in books, especially in the psychology section of a bookstore or a library, is books about how to fix yourself.
Yeah, self-improvement.
Right? Self-improvement. And really what you're talking about is fixing and improving your ego.
Yeah.
Okay.
Called losing yourself.
And generally it doesn't work very well. You may have some modest benefit from it, but essentially psychology has been a failure. Psychiatry essentially has been a failure. There have been some people that have been fixed, but as an overall, I remember I was a psychology major in college, and even at that tender age I realized I really didn't know anything. They were just taking a whole bunch of symptoms, giving it a name, and then coming up with some therapy for hoping it would do something. They really had no idea what they were doing. I always liked, but there was one thing about psychiatry I always liked, and that was that in order to practice it, you had to be psychoanalyzed.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah.
So that to really truly teach the path, you have to be maybe not a master, but you have to be on the path. You have to know what you're teaching. You can't just teach it as if you're teaching it from a book. You don't have that. People can tell you're not really authentic. You're just mouthing words that other people told you or that you read. You have to have traveled the path some ways yourself.
Well, in Buddhism, what's one of the first tenets of Buddhism? Well, life is about suffering. And this idea of safe space, and you're never going to suffer or shouldn't, destroys any coping skills that you have within the world, because there's going to be suffering. But what do most people do? They try to put so much pleasurable experience, which is total involvement in football or food or whatever gives them pleasure, to avoid what they perceive as pain, rather than, I look at it when I'm confronted with something that's trying, that's an opportunity. I learn more about myself during those times than I do other times.
Unfortunate but true.
Yes, you do.
The sad thing is if you don't learn, one of the saddest things to me in life is watching people repeat self-destructive patterns over and over again, because they are totally captured by their egos, their thoughts, their emotions.
And they're getting juice from being a victim.
And they're getting juice. You remember that quote where I read before, your ego doesn't know what's best for you.
No, it doesn't.
It just operates on automatic.
Well, Vernon Howard said a woman came to him with a long tale of woe. What a wonderful time she had in complaining of her mistreatment by others. Do you know people like that? Well, they must pay by giving up their love for their own suffering. The more and faster you pay, the more and faster you receive permanent riches. So it is to your benefit to see the meaning of this and pay swiftly. Here is something encouraging. Payment always consists of something harmful to you. So you see the whole thing is in your favor. It is like emptying a treasure chest of stones so it might be filled with jewels.
I wouldn't want to read that at a Me Too meeting.
But that's what it is.
Yeah.
Your payment is going to be something that's a problem to you to get rid of. But if you want to hold on to it and be the victim, then you're never going to be peaceful within yourself. It's impossible.
Right. And today, victimization is an institution. Being a victim.
A lot of money. A lot of money made.
in it.
A lot of money.
Yeah.
Bob, we're talking about Vernon Howard's book, Pathways to Perfect Living. And in chapter 5 is How to Live Serenely in a Violent World. Boy, that's fitting for today. But there's a thing I like to read, and we can talk about it. Talked about human wickedness and entrenched authorities, he states. They possess colossal stupidity and selfishness. Their chief weapons are lies and hypocrisy. It is a social lie that the majority is right. For only a self-liberated individual is right, and he is one in a million. Ouch. We're seeing so much, and we call it social injustice. We call it by different names, racism, social injustice. And I go back to personal responsibility. If each individual did exalt that personal responsibility, there would be no societal ills. But when a majority does not take personal responsibility, then whose responsibility is it to take care of them? They look to the government. The only way the government can function is tax us more. So when it becomes out of balance, are we going to have a revolution? Are those things going to happen? We can paint those scenarios, but if you are a self-liberated individual, to know there's nothing you can do about it. And that's a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah, to some degree, it's like complaining about lions killing other animals. Okay? It's just their nature. It's their biology. It's
the balance
culture.
Of nature. Yeah, it's not pretty sometimes.
Yeah. You know, that's one of the odd things is that when you become aware, or more aware, not only do you become more aware of yourself, you also become more aware of the world around you. And you're not, to use a word that's not used anymore, you're not Pollyanna.
Yeah.
Okay? You're not naive to the human condition and human nature. Right? We have not really changed that much since they used to brain people with stone clubs however many centuries ago. It's still, those brains are still being passed on from one generation to the next. So you have to take a little bit of the bad with the good.
There's a sentence I want to read here, but preface it by something we've talked about, and we'll talk about in today's world when we see the rioting, which is now gone beyond whatever good was proposed by Black Lives Matter. It's become basically a terrorist group, Marxist organization, whatever you want to call it. But, and there are other people, there are people who are doing that who claim, well, if we had more power, things would be better. There are people who are sitting at home saying, well, if I had an opportunity, if I was a politician, I wouldn't do that. Or if I was a policeman, I wouldn't do that. But here's what Vernon Howard says. He said, these good people, who are they? Who are the good people who get left out? They are often those who merely have not had the opportunity to behave as wickedly in public as they do in private.
There's nothing like giving somebody a smidgen of power.
No, no.
Yeah.
I've often called Vernon Howard. There are DVDs. You can go to anewlife.org and get all his books, DVDs. You can go to Amazon. But he's the drill sergeant in the Marines. He's the guy who just doesn't care. He will tell you, if you quit coming to class, if you can't get it, don't come anymore. You know, he's hardcore, and a lot of people don't like that. They become very nervous and they start fidgeting in their chair, and because they're getting called out for their lack of action.
Yeah, he's not about happy, feel good.
No, not at all. He's break through the illusion, quit kidding yourself, do the right thing. You can do it. You know.
And God forbid if you're there just to be entertained.
Oh, yeah. But you know what? Give him credit, because if you're not serious about it, I used to do some speaking engagements. In the last few I did, I asked people not to just silence your phone, turn your phone off. And they said, oh, what about an emergency? I said, how many of you had lately? Either you're here to listen to what I have to say uninterrupted, or you're not. If you can't do that, I just ask that you leave, because you're not serious.
Yeah, the addiction to technology caught me by surprise. I didn't think it would happen. Instead of, it's like the old story, instead of it being a tool you use, you're its tool.
Yeah.
Right?
I call it flat screens become flat lives.
Yeah.
And that's what happens.
I have an Apple iPhone, and if my usage is down for a week, they put a notice on, like they're concerned I'm not well or something.
Yeah, I get that weekly update, and they'll say your usage has increased 43%. And I said, oh, from 2 minutes to 3 minutes or 3.5 minutes or something.
Sure.
But let me just read this and let's talk about this.
Okay.
He says, never set yourself in imaginary situations and try to plan your behavior. This is a vain attempt to feel secure with a fixed plan, which you will not follow anyway. This only calls up a gang of nervous and useless thoughts. Instead, learn to live from your essence. Essence has no need for false aid and memorized plans. It knows exactly what to do in every situation. And you mentioned freedom, and this is one thing that really gave me freedom. I'm going into a meeting, I got a family situation I've got to enter into. There are two sides to that story.
Yeah.
I've already experienced one side with this person, but I go in totally just to be an observer and listen, having a preconceived which way I'm going to go with it. That's hard to do.
Yeah. You know, that reminds me of a thing they say in boxing. You go, you plan a fight, you know what you're going to do, and it lasts until the first time you get punched in the face.
It is. It's in interviewing. I've interviewed people for 40 years now. I can't tell you the times I had notes, hardly ever, maybe twice in all those interviews, because I didn't want to miss what that person was saying. Within that question is another question I could ask them, which would bring out more from them. But if I'm looking at my notes and thinking, oh, I got to ask, you'll totally miss the whole thing. And I see it all the time in interviews. People miss such an important part they should have grabbed a hold of.
Yeah, one experience I had like that is I was asked to go give a talk at one of those towers full of old folks, which I am now one of them. And I started they told me what they wanted me to talk about, so I started talking about it. And I just looked around the audience, and I could tell they weren't paying attention at all.
Not interested.
And I literally stopped. And I can say, I can tell you're not interested in what I'm saying. I'm a lawyer, ask me a question. And we had fun for the next 40 minutes. That was my allotted time. But if I just droned on and said, well, I got my plan, I got my speech, I'm going to keep following that, it would have been a waste of my time and their time. Instead, I have fun answering all their problems about grandkids and who's got the rights to do this and that. And it was enjoyable. It was only because I was trying to read my audience. So I could tell whether they were engaged with what I was saying or they weren't. And they weren't. I asked them, why were you here? They told us to go in this room. That's it. That's it.
And you're the purveyor of boredom, Bob Wallace.
Yeah. I had a little talk with the person that set that up.
Yeah, really. You should let them know. Yeah. But those, of thinking you're going into a situation, have this preconceived plan. Believe me, wars are won not by necessarily the plan that started out by you had to improvise. If you're going over the hill and you think, well, there are 1,000 enemy there, and somebody comes back and say, by the way, there are 10,000 here, that same plan's not going to work.
Yeah, you can't say that's not fair, it's going against my plan.
I think we better go around these people, these soldiers.
But really, we're sort of joking about this, but I do believe that once you've freed yourself up, you see things more clearly, and you're more aware of options of how you can respond to things. And you're more likely, you don't throw labels all over things. You certainly don't play the victim card when something goes wrong. So there's a lot to be said. And there's, you know, one of the things a lot of books talk about is how to free yourself from your past, right? Really what it should be, how to free yourself from your ego, because your ego is your past.
No, there's no past or present. How about just live in the present moment? We hear that, but I don't think people really understand it. They say, well, I'm here in the present moment. No, that means to become aware. Where are your hands? Where are your feet? Right. What happened in the past only affects you if you bring it forward.
Yeah. What is it they say? Keep the lesson and throw away the experience.
If you lose, don't lose the lesson. Same thing.
Right. So we're just saying what you're saying is that you don't need the emotional impact of it. You don't need how it felt to you. You don't need to be burdened by it. You just need to take the lesson and walk away.
Hey, if you're working on a construction site, and I was one time, and I didn't have steel-toed boots, something dropped on my toe. The next day I bought steel-toed boots. Why? I didn't want to go through that again. But right. I mean, that's a simple explanation.
Something dropped on your foot.
Yeah,
right?
Then I don't want to do this again.
Yeah, you didn't blame how it fell on your foot instead.
No, well, they didn't tell me I should have had steel-toed boots.
Yeah.
Well, maybe they should have, but they didn't. I didn't blame anybody. All I know, I didn't want to be limping around again.
Sure. Yeah. One of the things that I always liked, and I think this is one of the most quoted statements by a French guy, and generally I don't think too much of French intellectuals, but Voltaire said something that always struck me, and he says a lot in one sentence. He says, the unexamined life is not worth knowing. Actually, I wrote that, but it's not worth living. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's saying, if you go through your whole life and you never do any self-assessment, you never learn to separate yourself from your emotions, you're completely identified, it's a wasted life. You didn't learn what you were supposed to learn here.
Yeah, there's a book on self-inquiry by Sri Ramana Bhagavan. You can get that on Amazon if you're interested. One of my favorite reads is his works. And YouTube's a great thing. You can go to YouTube and you can get talks by Vernon Howard and Sri Ramana, and he practices self-inquiry. And that's really what we're talking about. And the beginning of wisdom, and this is what Vernon Howard is talking about in these two paragraphs, and I'll read through them. Until we clear our minds, we are no good to ourselves or others. Though our vanity fools us into thinking we are such precious little beams of sunshine. When a confused mind tries to do good, it does so with a secret motive of ego gratification. Reaching out in its own darkness, it makes the bottle of poison for medicine, making everyone sick. Take politics. Do not be dismayed if you cannot understand the arguments of opposing sides on political or social issues. You cannot understand because there is nothing real in them to understand. They make no more sense than the babble of small children. Both sides argue from ego-serving self-interest. Neither side is really interested in peace or human betterment. Their aim is to win their infantile points. But this they hope to blot out the awful fears of being nobodies. Wow.
Yeah, when you look at political advertising,
oh my goodness,
virtually everything's a distortion or a lie, outright lie, or at least partially false and misleading. I mean, there's no attempt, it seems like anymore, to even state, these are my policies, this is what I want to do. When they say they want to do, it's just platitudes. I'm going to make them, you know, everybody's going to get free health care. That's not a program, that's a platitude.
Yeah, what's the program?
Yeah. And I remember that especially from when Obama first came out before he became president. I kept waiting for him to say something. And he would make these speeches and everybody would clap and they'd run with the banners. And I'd turn to my wife and say, what did he say? She said, I don't know. He never actually said anything. And apparently that was one of his things. He didn't want to be pigeonholed as being for or against anything. When he was in Congress, he wouldn't vote because he didn't want anybody to think we voted for, increased salary and everything like that. But generally speaking, he didn't vote because he didn't want to be for or against anything.
How many times in interviews do you see interviewer ask a question and say, is that yes or no? They will never say yes or no. They'll just go on about something,
Right.
in this situation. No, well, do you believe that or not? Are you going to do, they will never answer the question.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about vanity, because you've read it a couple times in the quotes. And again, that's a little bit like ego. It's got a lot of definitions. And the typical one everybody thinks is the person strutting around like a peacock, thinking he's the greatest or she's the greatest person in the world. That's not really what he's talking about. There's another word for it that I like, is self-reflection. In other words, when you're going about in life, everything you see, you do it from the point of view, does this affect me? Is this important to me? In other words, everything is through how it affects you. And if it doesn't affect you, you don't care about it. Right. That's the vanity that he's talking about, okay? Where the world is about you. You just see yourself being reflected back from the world. Yeah. So a lot of people
narcissistic.
Say, yeah, because most people say, "Oh, I'm not vain," and then something happens. They're going to say, "Oh, this really makes this is big stuff. This will really affect me." That's self-reflection. He's not worried about the other guy. He's worried about himself. And that's the kind of vanity I think he's talking about, which is something that virtually, everybody does it. Okay.
They do.
Yeah, it's just a fact. And to some degree, you have to do it to survive in the world. But if that's all you do, like if self-reflection, or what he calls vanity, is part of what you do, that's normal. You need to do that. You won't survive in this world. Right? But if it's the only way you engage the world, you are vain or a vanity in his point of view.
Well, the things Vernon Howard talks about in his books, lectures, of getting to know who you truthfully are, your self-reflection, your self-inquiry. Mm-hmm. What you have to admit first, or don't even read the book, is you don't know. And basically, you're full of it. And that's what I had to say myself. I'm full of it. Bad thoughts, bad ideas. I need just to let go what I think. And I've said this often. What does an open mind mean? To me, an open mind is that this day, you and I sitting right here, I could hear something that would actually change my viewpoint from what I previously thought, that I wouldn't automatically reject it, that I wouldn't be emotionally attached to taking a side, even though it may be 180 degrees from what I thought previously. Mm-hmm. That is hard to do. It's even hard for me to do and to practice. But if you can't do that, you got to get to that point.
Well, do you remember when it used to be a virtue, a description of a strong man is he doesn't change his mind?
Yeah. Be tough. Don't cry. Don't do this. Don't do that.
Yeah.
No, that's not true. Yeah. Because I used to say this about the Kennedys. They got up and gave all these grandiose speech on Appalachian, the poor people. I'm thinking, what the hell do they know about poor people? Give me a phone call. When you grow up and you don't have food and you don't have the clothing that you wish you had or whatever. And believe me, people had a lot worse than I did. I never feared for my life. But even that poverty I was in gave me a very different viewpoint of people who are poor. And my mother used to say, well, God must love poor people. He made so many of them. What a mindset. And that's, no, he didn't make them. They made themselves in the long run. Mm-hmm. But to have that personal experience and move, what it taught me personally is all I know, Bob, I didn't want to live like that, period. Mm-hmm. I don't know how, like I didn't have this framework that I was going to be a millionaire. All I wanted was my needs taken care of, and I wanted freedom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. to me, I want to make one point about this business of choosing to be poor. In our country, you choose to be poor. There are countries where poverty is almost inescapable from people because they have no education, they get no help, there's all kinds of restrictions on what you can do as a person. Usually there's a small group of people that control the world, or control the country rather.
We talked about, Bob, you have to really admit to yourself that you have to get rid of things to make some space to let new stuff come in, and for your ego to say, basically, I don't know. I just don't know.
Yeah.
That's hard for people to do because you've been told you have this education and it's going to serve you well, but when it comes to what we're talking about, we're not talking about an intellectual education. We're talking about a spiritual education.
Right. Yeah, no, you're right about that. Let's see. Well, the only thing that I had was there's something he always makes reference to, but he never really talks much about, is that after the way I look at it is, first you have to not believe in your persona. That should be easy because you really know it's fake anyway. You know it's fake. You're presenting your best self. You're trying to make yourself look cooler than you are. Everybody knows that.
Yeah, like Fonzie.
Yeah, right. Yeah, like he was a fake, right? Big talker, not much action. Actually, was a teeny little guy.
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
And then there's the ego, which is the one that we're basically fooled into believing this is really me. With all its limitations, all its conflicts, all its problems, we really believe it's me. And that's hard to see through that and get distance from it and realize that it's just an artificial construct that's stuck in your head that you're confusing with reality. It's kind of like you see that thing in the movie 2000, was it 2001? See if we was way back, I guess, where out of chaos, the being that he goes to see creates a room that he's comfortable with. That's like an ego.
Yeah.
You have all this vast potential, and inside you create this little room, and you live in this little room. Okay, that's your ego. So we talked about natural knowing, which is what happens when you get out of the room, and the things that come to you. But he also hints that there's something more, something that can come to you. He doesn't really say what it is. I know some people call it the unknown.
The void, the light,
right.
Whatever you want to call it.
And that when they say unknown, they're distinguishing it from unknowable. So unknown is what you don't know, but you can know. And then there's what you can't know. It's just impossible for you to know. And so that's still down the road for me. But I think it's interesting to think is that there really is no end to this path. Even when you resolve the human dilemma and develop your human potential, then it's time to broaden out from there. And something may come to greet you. May not. He says it doesn't necessarily come, but it may come to you.
Well, I think you eventually return to the source. Not only when you translate from this existence, you return to the source of that awareness, but you can return to the source while you're still in the physical body to a certain point where you start to truly know who you are. Some people have that moment of enlightenment, that flash. I mentioned Bhagavan Ramana had that when he was 17 years old and saw it clearly. And that started him on the path of self-inquiry to find out what had happened to him. But in this physical world, when we're talking about Vernon Howard and his book, Pathways to Perfect Living, and I'm right here on this chapter of how to live serenely in a violent world, how to stop playing the painful game of living, and that's what we're talking about. And I'll just read these two paragraphs. Of course the game is painful, of course the game is painful. You know that much, but you may not know how to stop. It is as if you're playing a rousing game of tennis with someone who is important in your life. When you grow tired and wish to stop, but your opponent continues to hit the ball, forcing you to continue. because you don't want him to be disappointed with you, you warily go on with the game. To stop, you must risk his displeasure. You must make it clear that you no longer wish to play. You must see something very clearly. You must see that mankind's game is utterly false. He has false answers, false heroics, false kindness, false intelligence. The whole show is pure nothing. In his vanity, a man thinks he is part of the solution, when in fact he contributes to the problem. He lives in a raging madhouse of compulsive desires, which, even if obtained, leave him with a tormenting thirst for more. He has no idea of who he is unless another deluded human being tells him, and even then he senses the emptiness of a labeled self.
Yeah, we're back to the ego again.
Yeah.
You know, and there's that perception.
You got to be tired of playing the game. I think that's really the simplest. I'm tired, I'm weary, it's displeasure. I think it's happiness, it's falsehood. What is that? Don't make happiness your goal.
No, it's this, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yes.
You know, it's really what you're talking about. And, you know, we're getting into a more polarized world now, where people are demanding that you take sides. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot more of that. You're either with us or you're against us. They're not allowing you a middle road. They're not allowing you to step back and say, I'm not interested. You know?
Yeah, and that's what we've really come to, that there's no middle ground or no ground for discussion, because then the mob attacks you if you happen to say what the mob doesn't feel. Well, then you're not with us anymore. That group think, well, and I'll continually point to Black Lives Matter. If you question, well, Black Lives Matter, but who's burning down the city? Oh, that's got nothing to do with it. Well, it's a preface to doing it, you know, the discontent. So the people who started it were self-confessed Marxists. So it's what was the movie we watched called Lamplighting? Or
gaslighting.
Gaslighting.
Mm-hmm.
It's gaslighting where, look, what you think doesn't exist. No matter what your eyes tell you, no matter what you hear, no matter what you think, don't pay any attention to that. It's called gaslighting in the movie of the 1940s. We're going to convince you you're crazy for thinking that. You've got to think the way we think.
Right.
And that's why you have Stalin and Hitler and Mussolini and Pol Pot, and you just name these people who are heinous.
Right. You know, my favorite thing is someone says, you're a racist. And you say, no, I'm not. That proves you're a racist.
Yeah.
Your denial of being a racist proves you're a racist. There's no logic in that whatsoever, but they stand back triumphant that they've defeated you.
Well, ask them to define a racist, and they really stutter. No, that's your opinion. What's the definition? They have no idea.
Right.
So, we can go down that road, and that's a trap within itself, and that's what we're talking about. I don't want to play the game anymore.
Yeah. They have counters to most all those things that in their minds is meaningful, but really isn't. They're not really winning anything. And again, I go back, I think a lot of these people are very egotistical. They have all sorts of concerns about that they have to be right. And to be fair to them, look at the terrible educations that they've had from the self-esteem movement and some of the other things we've talked about in the past, that they're fragile.
And they've been preached to since they were born that they're victims.
Right.
You're in this poverty situation or in this whatever situation you're in, it's because you're a victim and people don't like you and this and that. And then you'll see people of the same race background from outside the country come here and be tremendously successful. They see opportunity and they see themselves as being a victim.
And from Vernon Howard's point of view, the problem is they've identified with these things, so they make it part of themselves.
It becomes your identity.
Right.
Absolutely.
And they derive pleasure from that identity. They derive a sense of justification from that identity, and it's all an illusion in their heads.
Right. I always like the saying, they get juice from it, just like a battery gets juice. So it is an emotionally electrical charge. It just surges through their body. But unfortunately, it usually manifests in anger and destruction.
Yeah.
Not only of them, but of cities.
Yeah. Vernon Howard likes to call it a false sense of life.
Yes.
Yeah. He does have a way with words.
He does have a way with words.
Yeah.
And so we've talked about Vernon Howard. Hopefully we've given you some things to think about. The book is Pathways to Perfect Living. You can go on YouTube. Mm-hmm. You can go to anewlife.org and read about Vernon Howard. Mm-hmm. And you can go to Amazon and order his books. So Bob, anything you want to close with?
Sure. Most of what we got and talked about was from 1 or 2 books. He wrote 22. So don't think by any means that we exhausted what you can learn from Vernon Howard.
Well, and I also think you can take one book and read it and reread it, but you've got to put it into practice. Reading is just intellectual, and that's another trap of thinking I've got the answers. I can debate you on Vernon Howard's works. I just don't live them. And so that's a different story.
Sure, right. And it was that same example as you can read 100 books on love, you can teach college courses and graduate courses on love, but if you've never been in love, you have no idea what it means. If you've never loved a child or loved a spouse, you have no idea what it is. No, you don't. Yes. And we hope you come to love his works, and we'll talk to you next time. We'll see you next time on Hacking the Truth.